Ladies and gentlemen, I think I've been given the okay. I think everything is plugged in and working now. So I'd like to call this meeting of the Whitefish City Council on January 20th at 7:10 p.m., beginning promptly at 7:17 p.m. To order. And with that, for the call of order, I'd like to ask Eric Mulcahy to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, if you would. At this time on our agenda, we call for communications from the public. This is comments from the public regarding any matter that is not otherwise a public hearing this evening. So we'd like to entertain that now. And Toby Scott, please join us.
Toby Scott, 1478 Barclay Lane, Whitefish. And this is just a reminder to those watching out there and those here that there is a meeting on Wednesday the 22nd between 3:30 and 6:30 at the O'Shaughnessy Center regarding the Highway Department of Montana's preferred plan for the entrance to Whitefish. I'll have you all know that there are several plans. Their preferred one is not really what anyone that I know of that lives in Whitefish would like. The preferred one that I and several of the other people that are aware of this have preferred is option G, which involves the Highway Department making Spokane Avenue from 13th at Walgreens into 7th into 3 lanes, 2 northbound, 1 southbound. At 7th, they will put an intersection, and either them or us will complete 7th Avenue from Kalispell to Spokane Avenue, and at that point, the road will reduce to 2 lanes and a bicycle path all the way to Spokane. If they get their way with option C, I believe it is, it would be 3 lanes from 13th Street all the way to 2nd Avenue, 2 going north, 1 going south with a bicycle lane. And if they don't have enough room in the current curb-to-curb width, they have evidently easement or some means of going to their extended area, which is from the housing side of the sidewalk to the other housing side of the sidewalk, which means if they felt like it, they could take out all those trees that are in that boulevard area. And when confronted with that, of what about those trees? The response was, they're kind of at the end of their life anyway. So I would urge anyone to go to this meeting, which is at the O'Shaughnessy, like I say, from 3:30 to 5:30 or 6:30, and voice your opinion. Hopefully they will display option G in addition to their preferred option, which could have the option of losing all the trees along Spokane Avenue. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. Any other public comment this evening? Yes, sir. Your name and address for the record?
Shane Axholm, 811 Railway, Whitefish High School, Class 91, Go Dogs. I just wanted to formally complain about the garbage dump that's in front of our house in the railway district. It's, I guess, termed a recycling center, but it's more of just a dumping ground for garbage. And I would like to thank the council for entertaining our complaints about people just dumping their garbage and putting up a no dumping sign in the lot across the street from our house. We have a spectacular view of Big Mountain and the Whitefish Range in its entirety. It's in that picture of Russ, Ed, and Molly wistfully looking at Big Mountain, and right in between that is a garbage dump now. It's pretty unsightful. And also would like to lodge, on behalf of everyone in the railway district right there, our displeasure with any proposal to come and put a maximum density housing project across the streets from our house, because it would destroy that view for all of us and pretty much our neighborhood. It's already a traffic nightmare with school twice a day. I just don't think neighborhood can bear it. Thank you.
Great, thank you, sir. Any other public comment this evening? Anything online from Ms. Michelle? Okay, thank you. With that, I'll close public comment at this time and move on to communications from volunteer boards. Any volunteer board reports from Jan?
Jan Metzbaker, 915 Dakota. I sent the council a letter a couple weeks ago regarding the problem of weeds. I'm the chair of the kind of defunct weed committee, but with this hot, dry summer and a lot of the boulevards, the grass had died. The only thing that was living was an abundance of knapweed. And my problem with this is the city created those boulevards, and they put down, the contractor put down soil that was not weed-free, and all these landowners have inherited a lot of knapweed, and they were told it's their responsibility. Now, I notice that the city does prune trees in the boulevards, and they've taken responsibility for trees. Why can you not take care of the knapweed, especially in the boulevards? It hangs over the road, and it gets tracked everywhere. And I can tell you, with the weed committee, I have turned some of these addresses in for 15 years, and all they do is mow it, and knapweed does not kill it if you mow it. And it really needs to be taken care of because it is proliferating all over town and the boulevards, and I've listed a lot of them, and they're all city street projects. So I don't know if there's a law against the city taking care of the boulevards and the grass and getting rid of weeds. You do take care of trees, so I hope you'd consider that. And just another thing, I have a 10,000 volt fence that Fish, Wildlife, and Parks installed in my yard this week, which I'm not real happy about having, but we have been so besieged with bears in our yard and ruining our trees and raising havoc. And I really hope the city will take garbage seriously and work on people with fruit trees and maybe working with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, because knowing there are 16 to 18 bears in town, that is a problem, and it's a safety issue because I can hardly walk out my door without running into a bear all hours of the day. And finally, 2 years ago, I sent you a letter, and the city said they were going to adopt a deer management plan, and you have yet to talk to Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. Last night, I had 7 deer in my yard outside the fence, but they're a problem, and I documented cases of collisions, injuries, insurance claims, and problems that deer are causing in this town, not to mention property that's being destroyed. So I hope you will contact Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. I know that they are waiting to hear from you because you have to invite them in. But bears and deers, I mean, they're lovely, but there's a lot of them, and they are causing problems. So thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Any other public comment this evening? Any other volunteer boards from the council? Seeing none, I think we'll move on to our consent agenda. And are there any changes or additions, or can I have a motion, please?
I'd like to make a motion to accept the consent agenda without change.
I will second.
Motion made and seconded. Any other comment? All those in favor? Raise your hand. All those opposed, like sign. That motion passes unanimously. Now, we're going to move on to our public hearings this evening. Item A is a consideration of a request from Doug Venice and Randy Venice and Bruce Rodstrom. Please apologize for my pronunciation. And Jim, for preliminary plat for a 2-lot subdivision located at 504 Dakota Avenue, Zone WRR2.
All right, so this is a pretty simple one. I know we've got stuff later on the agenda, so I'll try and move through this pretty quick. So this is a request for preliminary plat to subdivide a residential property at 504 Dakota Avenue into just 2 lots. The lot's currently vacant and it's zone WRR2. The property's about a little over a half acre. It's on the corner of Dakota and Bay Point there, but access will be from Dakota for both lots. All of the surrounding Zones are WRR2 except to the east, that's just WR2, so nightly rentals are allowed everywhere besides the properties over to the east. It's got a 10 unit per acre max density. All utilities are already in, sidewalks and all other infrastructure is complete. There was already a house on the same property a few years back. And then everything just north of there, it's a bunch of townhomes that are all connected to all the city services already as well. Notices were mailed, signs on the property. One comment's been received up to this point. I just spread it out to you because I think I forgot to put it in the packets. It's from the neighbors across the street. I spoke with them as well in the office, and they recognize that the density really won't change one way or another, whether or not this lot is subdivided, but they just want to make sure that parking's taken into consideration, because that's been a big issue out there. The street's fairly narrow, and then they're also just in general concerned with building density with the high number of short-term rentals that are in across the street already, which is understandable. As far as health and safety, fire hydrants are available, properties outside the floodplain. It doesn't require a traffic impact study since the number of trips is less than 200 per day, and there shouldn't be any different impact on local services than is currently there. WRR2 zone is compatible with the growth policy, as the growth policy designates the area as resort residential, so that's the same. I'll keep it simple. Our recommendation would be that the City Council adopt the findings of fact and approve WPP 21-03 subject to the 9 conditions. They're all pretty standard, so nothing really to point out there either. With that, I can take any questions.
Any questions from council on this matter at this time? One, I have one, and it was brought up as we reviewed our work session today. We say garbage shall be stored in a secure location. Do we need to amend our conditions to assure that garbage, including recyclables, shall be secured? My feeling on that is that if we're going to if people are going to end up with 2 garbage, that may affect how they construct storage areas within those facilities. Do we need to do that? Is that something we should be considering?
I mean, it's definitely something that you could consider on a condition, but I mean, that would be on a project-by-project basis. It might be better to look into something a little bit broader through Public Works. I don't know if Craig has anything to add on that, but.
Okay.
We could simply just say solid waste, because it's all classified in the solid waste code between recycling and well, it will be.
Okay, maybe that should be given the newness of this particular initiative, I'll call it, I think it would be fair that most people would assume when we talk about garbage, we're talking about a single can. Somehow we need to, through our zoning programs and through our requirements, it would seem to me be only fair that we start identifying this is now changed and this is what we mean by garbage, so that people understand that they need to create spaces for those kinds of containers, both of them. Okay, just a thought. Thank you. All right.
Anything else?
I don't see any. We normally allow the developer or the representative to make comment at this time. Are they present, and would they like to make any comments? Eric.
Good evening. My name's Eric Mulcahy with Sand Surveying, 2 Village Loop, Kalispell, and I'm representing the applicants on this project. We're in complete agreement with the staff report and the planning board recommendation. I'm here to answer questions and regarding the condition on storage of garbage and recyclables, if you want to broaden that condition to include that, we're totally fine with that. So, thank you.
Thank you. We advertised for a public hearing on this matter, and at this time we'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone here that wants to speak on this matter? Going once? Okay, going twice. And we'll close the public hearing, and I'll turn it back to council for a motion and discussion.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, I would move to approve WPP 21-03 with the findings of fact as recommended by the Whitefish Planning Board on August 19th, 2021.
Rebecca, for the record, it might be helpful for you to actually speak into the microphone.
I second that motion.
Thank you. Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion, anything you wish to offer on this one? Okay. All those in favor, please raise your hands. All those opposed, like sign. Motion passes unanimously. Good luck. We'd like to move on to item B, consideration of a request from Paige McDonald for a conditional use permit to construct an accessory apartment above a new garage located at 950 Edgewood Place.
All right, so this is another ADU application. They will be putting in an accessory apartment above a new two-car garage, again at 950 Edgewood. That's kind of the last property on Edgewood that's still within city. The owner's Paige McDonald, like you said. To the north and west, it's WLR, which is limited residential, which the property is as well. And then to the south and east, it's both county properties. So to the south, it's rural residential county, and then to the east, it's heavy industrial under the county. Our growth policy designation for this area is urban, which does correspond to the WLR zoning. We haven't received any public comments after notices and the sign out on the property. We also didn't have any public comment at the planning board meeting. All parking is available on site based on the current plans. That'll be 2 spaces for the single family home and 1 space for the apartment. They will be required to pave at least the first 80 feet of the driveway. It's currently dirt and just right off of Edgewood. Everything else, design standard wise, looks like it's met, but that'll be confirmed at the time of the building permit as well. The accessory apartment under our regulations is not allowed to be in front of the primary residence. However, Dave has granted a waiver for that, which is allowed in our code. Since it's a very, very long, skinny lot, everything's already built out on the back end of the lot, and then there's also just a ton of tree coverage, so you really can't even see it from the front of the house there. So overall, our recommendation is for approval by the city council, subject to 8 conditions. A couple to point out real quick would just be, again, that the first 80 feet of the driveway must be paved. The property owner has to give us a recorded copy of a deed restriction showing that they'll be living in the primary house if they choose to rent it out. And then, of course, short-term rentals are not permitted as always. That's all I have.
Any questions at this time? I have one. Mm-hmm. This is referred to in Exhibit A as the Casey Guest House.
Yeah, for some reason, when we first got their application, that's what it had said. And so as we were kind of going on and doing the staff report, we just started putting under McDonald's, so it made more sense to everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. We advertise for a public hearing at this time, and again, normally we would allow the applicant to make any comments at the initiation of the public hearing. Is the applicant here or wish to make any comment? All right, don't see the applicant, so any member of the public wish to speak on this matter, please step forward. Seeing none, any online that you're aware of?
Those of you online, if you'd like to speak towards this, please unmute your mic, please.
Seeing none, I will close the public hearing at this time and turn it back to council for a motion and discussion. Sure.
Dave, I just have never seen this before where you granted a waiver to place a garage in the front. How does that work, just for my education?
So there's a provision within the zoning code where any accessory building needs to be set equal to or behind the foundation of the primary structure.
Yeah.
And so in general, with our, WR2 zone neighborhoods that are, very small lots, that makes a lot of sense. But when you're talking about a larger lot on a WR1 where maybe the house is set all the way down at the far end, there's no neighbors, you can't even see the house from the road, it's mostly meant to, protect the historic neighborhood so that somebody doesn't build a garage in the front of it, where you're actually seeing the house and the front porch. But on a bigger lot, there's a exemption in the code where the zoning administrator can grant a waiver because of the size of the lot, the configuration, the topography. And so, we probably grant maybe 5 or 6 of those a year where someone has a unique situation where there's a lot and they just have to submit a letter and a site plan to show where it is, and you just sign off that that's okay, that they have a accessory building in front of the house just because of the way the lot's configured. And then this is one of those situations.
Yeah, that's great. I didn't know we had the flexibility to do that. All right, thank you. Then I'd like to make a motion. If
Carry on.
there's no other, you guys okay?
Yes, please.
Okay. I'll make a motion to approve, let's see, sorry. WCUP 21-17 with conditions as listed.
Motion by Councilor Norton,
I'll second.
seconded. Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion, Rebecca? Anyone else in council? All those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed, like sign. Motion passes unanimously. And on we go to item C, which is consideration of a request of the 406 Standard LLC for conditional use permit to develop 6 attached family condominium project, or a single-family condominium project located at 1625 Highway 93 West. And
Dave's going to put a site plan up for you while we visit about this. So again, the applicant is proposing to construct 6 single-family condominium units in 6 detached buildings at 1625 Highway 93 West. Access will be off of Highway 93 West, which will be shared with the 1515 Highway 93 project that you folks looked at and approved last year. So it should look kind of familiar, the stuff to the east. The shared driveway will have a landscape roundabout to slow traffic as it enters before splitting and entering 2 separate underground parking areas, one to the east, which is the 1515 project, and one to the west for the 1625 condos. Each unit will have 4 parking spaces. There's also some guest parking located around the roundabout. This project is going to function as one project with shared access, shared open space, walking paths, recreational amenities, including barbecues, hot tubs, grass areas, paved plazas. You'll recall the project to the east had a little wetland in the middle, which is how they oriented their buildings in order to protect that little wetland. After further review of the wetland and how the project's going to be designed, has led to the realization that the installation of the underground parking is actually going to de-water the wetland. So the applicant and their consultant determined it was best to relocate that wetland. And so it'll be located further to the west along the highway, which is permitted through the water quality protection regulations. It is a low quality wetland. I don't know if you remember, it looked kind of just like ditches. And so they're gonna do a 1 to 1.5 ratio replacement out by the highway, and it'll be a higher quality wetland. A conditional use permit is required for developments with multiple buildings on a single lot. Again, the property's at 1625 Highway 93 West. It's almost 2 acres. There's a single family home and several outbuildings that will be removed as part of the project. And the project is zone WR1, which was recently designated. The growth policy designation currently is suburban residential. It's served by all public services and facilities. We put a sign on the property, noticed adjacent landowners, placed illegal in the paper, notified advisory agencies. As of the date of the report for planning board, we didn't have any comments, but we did receive 1 letter at the time of planning board noting kind of more of the original project and how its relationship to the project further to the east. Just some questions with that particular item. So we review these according to the criteria for conditional use permits. It does comply with the growth policy. The density would permit up to 7 dwelling units, and the applicant is proposing 6. so it's 3.1 dwelling units per acre. Setbacks are being met, parking's being met, height and lot coverage will be reviewed at the time of building permit. Under site suitability, the project is consolidating 2 access points that are serving currently 2 single-family homes, so that's always a good thing when we get those on highways. MDT will review the application, or reviewed the application and noted this change in approach and will require a new updated approach permit. And any work within the right-of-way will require a right-of-way permit. This particular property does not have any environmental constraints. The applicant is taking advantage of the grade because it does kind of go uphill from the highway for their placement of the units. And again, they're proposing to relocate a very small, very low quality wetland from the project to the east and put it over here to the west in a low spot. There's no other environmental constraints on the property. Let's see. There's an existing left-hand turn out on Highway 93, and they'll extend that bay a little bit further to access this particular project. And again, MDT will review that. Water and sewer are available. Stormwater is going to be all consolidated between the 2 projects. The fire department serves the site. There are sidewalks within the western portion or the eastern portion of the project that kind of serve as open space areas, but they also serve as fire access. The fire access was kind of extended further to the south and west to serve the southern portion of this particular project. And then there's also a new road being installed as part of the Highway 93 LLC project further to the west. The fire department will not enter the underground parking area, but access parking via exterior entrances. No new streets are going to be constructed. No road improvements are required. When they put the driveway in, if it requires the removal or installation of some street trees, they need to work with the Parks Department on that. The applicant did not submit a traffic study because it'll generate less than 200 trips per day. Architectural review is not a requirement for single-family homes. The neighborhood is a mixture of multifamily, the golf course, border patrol, Grouse Mountain Lodge, townhouses, and other vacant properties. Again, the density will increase, but it is being met. The planning board held a public hearing on, when did that? August 19th. The applicant's representative and a member spoke at this hearing. The neighbor had questions about utilities and access to the project. Again, architectural review is not a requirement for single family, but the planning board did offer a recommended condition number 11 that the applicant must avoid a monotonous building design and bring their design to the architectural review committee at a pre-application meeting. This is something that we've done for projects in the past, or I guess a project in the past where there wasn't necessarily an architectural review requirement, but they just wanted to send it to the ARC review committee just to get some feedback from that. So the planning board did recommend approval, subject to 11 conditions of approval. Just to hit some of the highlights. Again, the existing driveway, back on that site plan, the 2 driveways need to be removed and restored with curb gutter, boulevard landscaping, and possibly coordinate with the Parks Department if any street trees need to be installed or removed. They need to obtain a permit from MDT for access to the highway, and that change in use will require a wetland restoration plan to be submitted to our office for review and approval. And then again, the applicant must avoid a monotonous building design and must bring their design to the ARC review committee at a pre-app meeting. Can I answer any questions for you?
Yeah.
Rebecca?
So Wendy, when this came through, I drove the property and the wetland was significant. And then I just drove out there and it's gone.
It's in the middle of the property. You couldn't see it by driving by it.
Okay, but what happened to the one, so I drove through both entrances. And there was,
Can you show the aerial?
yeah, maybe I'm on the wrong spot. Isn't this across from State Park Road?
Not where construction is occurring. It's to
Okay.
the east. So, I don't know if you can, do you know where the wetlands
Yeah,
are,
I
Dave?
think Rebecca may be thinking about 93 LLC, which is under construction.
Yeah.
There are
This is
wetlands
the
that are being restored.
Project to the east.
This is to
So-
the east, and they're not significant. It's like 1,000
Oh,
square feet.
is this, okay, sorry. So this is the one where there is a wetland with an underground parking lot, right?
Correct.
Okay, so,
It's really essentially, it looks like a ditch that was dug. It's about this wide and maybe, I don't know,
Yeah.
not very long.
no, I looked at that site too, so then I can understand this. But, so what I'm worried about is if they've covered up the wetland on 93 LLC, like completely, it's gone, where is that water gonna go if it's not gonna go to this property?
The wetlands at 93 LLC are being protected. They're part of their open space requirement. That's a separate project that was approved.
Yeah, but they're all kind of draining down into the same bottom area where they're gonna be building. And then underneath, it goes over to the golf course. So,
I don't know where the drainage is, and maybe their applicant could describe the drainage
yeah, I just,
situation a little bit better. I know that they've been working closely with their engineers on how to handle the stormwater.
yeah, okay. Yeah, no, on this property, you're right, the wetland was smaller, but I still was
quite a
concerned about,
bit higher than the 93 LLC property.
yeah, a little bit higher. All right, thank you.
And Rebecca, you recognize that this property is probably half a mile from 93 LLC.
Well, they're next door to each other, kind of.
Are they?
So
Or
you
maybe I'm thinking of
Thinking of 95 Carroll.
95 Carroll. Okay, so this is different. All right, well then okay.
Correct,
Yeah,
correct.
that's right. Okay.
There's a road in between,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I just drove to the end of Fox Hollow and looked at it, is what I did to see it this time, what
Oh,
I did
yeah.
last time too, and walked it. But I was really alarmed that the water that would possibly be transferred into this property could affect this development, because that wetlands at 93 LLC was huge. Anyways, maybe what you guys are saying is take one project at a time, but a lot of times when I think about water, I don't really think it has boundaries. I think it's gonna go where it will, so.
Ben?
Wendy, there's another item on our agenda after this one that has to do with the same property, right?
Correct.
And that's for the zoning change or growth
No,
amendment change.
it's
the
amendment to the
change.
growth policy to change
Yep.
it to resort residential, correct?
Is one dependent on the other, or are these totally separate issues? The development of these buildings
not.
versus the zoning or the,
The land use development's gonna happen, independent of that growth policy amendment.
so the proposal is compliant with the zoning
Correct.
in either
The
zoning
WR1,
designation?
the setbacks, yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
And no short-term rentals.
Under the WR1, no.
Correct.
The property next door has a resort residential zoning, and they are eligible for short-term rentals.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Wendy? Okay.
Wendy, what's a monotonous building design?
I think the planning board was concerned that the buildings in the packet looked very similar, and they were concerned that we'd end up with something that looks more like the project out on Wisconsin Avenue that folks are a little unhappy with, that the buildings look very, very similar.
Okay.
I think that was the hope, to avoid something like that.
Any other questions for Wendy? Okay, thank you. At this time, we'd like to open up the public hearing on this matter. And as we've done in the past, we'd like to let the applicant make any testimony they'd like at this time if they're available. Eric.
Good evening. My name is Eric Mulcahy, 2 Village Loop with Sand Surveying, and I'm representing the Kyles who are here tonight as well for this request. We've read the staff report and are in complete agreement with the conditions. The Kyles also agreed with the planning board's amendment to the conditions to add the architectural review element. They're fine with going and trying to essentially designed these structures so they're not monotonous. So that's completely okay with us. Regarding the drainage, the 93 LLC drainage comes from the north across the highway, comes into a series of wetlands, and then there's going to be some constructed drainage facilities in that 93 LLC property. And then it's going to follow the traditional path, which actually is south of the Kyle's property, and runs through the Wishers and ultimately over into the Grouse Mountain Lodge area. So I believe our drainage actually flows north, and so it's the topography is unusual in this particular area. So, but it's will be addressed, and our drainage plan will have to be reviewed by Public Works to ensure that we're meeting our standards for the city.
Thank you. By the way, any questions for Eric? Eric, just a moment. Rebecca?
So Eric, thanks for explaining that. And have you guys done any testing of how deep the water is and all that stuff? Because I remember when this came through before, I was worried about the underground garage. Now we're getting quite a few underground garages being built in the downtown area, and we have a lot of water here, and they seem to be doing okay. But have you done any like on-site testing of how deep the water table is or any of that?
We did with the first conditional use permit. We had some geotechnical exploration. I don't know if there's been any additional geotechnical work, just the initial work. But I believe the engineers and the geotechnical engineer are working together to try to design these below grade parking areas so that they don't become inundated themselves or impact that groundwater flow.
Or transfer lots of water elsewhere. Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Again, anybody from the public wish to speak on this matter, please step forward. Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing at this time and turn it back to council for a motion and discussion.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, I would move that we approve WCUP 21-16, the findings of fact in the staff report, and the conditions as approval and recommended by our own Whitefish Planning Board from their August 19, 2021 meeting.
Motion's made. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by, we have a motion and seconded. Andy, do you wish to speak to your motion at all?
No comment.
No, I thought that was a start of something. Any other councilor have any comments on this matter? Rebecca?
Could I just ask Public Works a question?
Sure.
Okay. So Craig, is there any language that we can add about protecting adjacent neighbors from trespassing water? I know that's a state law, but do we just, like, what happens if this fails with the water?
So there will be a required engineered stormwater management plan. They will have to detain water on site to the pre-development rates, and there will be a 2-year warranty period after which we will go and inspect it and make sure it's doing what it was designed to do.
Can we inspect it more routinely?
And that's in the engineering standards. So it's covered in the conditions of approval as written, or as the staff report lays out.
Okay. For some reason, I get so worried about the way that we're building everything underground, and we have so much underground water, but you're the engineer. Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? All those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed, like sign. Motion passes unanimously. We'll move on now to our, to what I believe is resolution number 21-38, a resolution of intention to indicating its intention to adopt amendments to the map. This is going to have to start over again. A resolution of intention indicating its intention, who's its? Its intention to adopt amendments, a map amendment to the 2007 City of Whitefish City County Growth Policy. Did I get that right, or did I? Okay, thank you. Just trying to follow
You got it right,
directions
though.
here, and I'm having a hard time. Okay, well, I'm trying, okay.
Oh,
All
that's-
right, Wendy, thank you.
Yeah. So again, this is the exact same property, 1625 Highway 93, and the applicants are proposing to amend the growth policy land use designation from suburban to resort residential. The property is 1.9 acres. It has frontage on Highway 93 and it is got Highway 93 on the north and a private road on the west side, and then resort residential on the south and the east. Again, as I was describing earlier, this project and the project to the west or east are essentially going to function together with access, stormwater, open space and amenities and fire access and all that other good stuff. So the purpose of the map amendment is to facilitate an eventual rezone so the whole project does function better together. They're not currently requesting a rezone. Again, it's at 1625 Highway 93 West, and it's 1.9 acres. It's developed with a single-family home and currently zoned WR1. The land use designation is suburban residential, and they're proposing a resort residential. The property is served by all public services and facilities. As part of the other notice, we noticed adjacent landowners about this request as well. So the growth policy does provide a little bit of guidance for making amendments to the growth policy that need to be considered in the overall context of all the growth policies, or the goals and policies of the growth policy. The growth policy says that the criteria to consider when a property is applying for amendment is, are there errors? Have community conditions changed? And is there some sort of clear and extraordinary community benefit? We did not find that there was any errors with the growth policy. Community conditions haven't necessarily changed, but this lot does have resort residential on two sides of it, and it is bounded by two roads. So in our minds, it seems like a logical kind of end of a resort residential designation. And again, the projects are going to function together as far as all the stuff we've been visiting about. So it does make a logical western boundary. The 93 West Corridor Plan did not evaluate any changes in this particular area. It was actually silent. They were more worried about stuff that was closer into town and the Idaho timber, but this end of the corridor, there were no changes that were proposed. Under clear and extraordinary community benefit, again, this project is going to function as one, and you'll recall that 1515 project is going to pay and was conditioned to pay the $1.2 million in lieu of developing legacy homes. Of course, since that project was approved, the Montana State Legislature passed a bill prohibiting communities from inclusionary zoning, but this project was approved before that went into effect, and the applicant, they could have let their project lapse and redesigned it, but they have not, and they still intend to pay that fee versus letting the CUP lapse and not paying that fee. Again, this area is in the, I think it was like the it was the western residential area of the 93 West Corridor Plan, which did not make any recommendations for any changes. The planning board held a public hearing on August 19th. The applicant's representative and 3 members of the public spoke at the hearing. One was not in support of the request. One thought the request was on an adjoining property, and the other had questions about the adjoining property, but nothing specific about this particular project. The planning board did vote 4-2 in support of making this request and adopted the findings of fact in the staff report. And again, they felt like this was a logical western edge of that resort residential designation. Can I answer any questions for you? And I can get Dave to put the other map up if that's more helpful so you can really see the roads, or if this one's a good one for the growth policy right now.
Wendy, are you intimating or telling us that that if we don't approve this zone change, that the condition of approval requiring the payment of the 1.9 on the other project will likely go away? Is that what we're being informed?
I'm just saying that you could look at the whole thing as one project, and as part of that one project, they are paying, you know, a pretty sizable fee towards affordable housing.
Okay, thank you. Angie, this is a question. Should we approve this? Is the developer in a position to, given the change in state law, simply opt out of paying the affordable housing fee that they agreed under the prior approval?
Well, I mean, I think the prior approval, what they could do is just let it lapse. They could just let their CUP lapse and then come back in for a CUP and not have to pay the fee.
Okay.
My understanding is that hasn't been their intent. We did have another project where they were required to pay a fee, and they basically told us, no, we're not doing it. So.
And this project too is using some of the legacy home incentives as far as height and I believe parking, maybe. I think there's a couple of incentives that they're using.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Wendy at this time? Yeah, Ben.
In item 3, it talks about extraordinary community benefit, and I see a lot of the language in there is in reference to benefits provided under the approval of the adjacent project. Is that a legal issue for us? I mean, I know, aren't we supposed to analyze the benefit of the proposal in front of us, which is just for these 6 units?
I mean, I guess, again, you know, they're sharing access, stormwater, open space, amenities. The project's going to function as one project.
Any other questions for Wendy at this time? Oh, go ahead, Rebecca.
So Wendy, do we have a list of what extraordinary community benefits are? I mean, so that's a subjective
Up to
thing.
you to make that determination, yep.
Okay.
Any other questions for Wendy? Seeing none, we advertise for a public hearing, and we'll open that public hearing now. We'll give the applicant and/or his representative or their representative an opportunity to speak first, if they choose to do so. Eric, you're back.
Good evening. My name's Eric Mulcahy, 2 Village Loop, Kalispell, with Sand Surveying, and I'm representing the Kyles on this application for a growth policy amendment. Again, we've read the staff report and are in complete agreement with staff's findings as well as the planning board recommendation. I think it is important to note or reemphasize that the 6 units that we proposed with the previous conditional use permit and the conditional use permit that was granted a year ago essentially create a whole project with our access, amenities, and open space, wetlands, drainage, everything kind of works together really well. Also, by the Kyles purchasing this property next door where the 6 units are going to go, we're able to move that whole project over another 15 feet to give a little more room between us and the Fox Hollow and the Eagle Crest condos, I think they're called, on that side. So we're trying to give a little more breathing room on that side of the project to the neighbors. So there's a lot of benefits just by bringing these two properties together. And so that's the goal of this growth policy amendment, to essentially actually have a zoning that lays on both. And just to be clear, they would like to offer short-term rentals in those 6 units if this amendment were to be approved. So if you approve it, they would likely move ahead with a zone change in the future. So that said, we're here to answer questions, and we would appreciate your vote.
Any questions for the applicant or Eric? Fine. Not seeing any. Again, we advertise for public hearing. Any member of the public who wishes to speak on this matter, please step forward.
Good evening, Mary Flowers, Citizens for a Better Flathead, 135 Main Street in Kalispell. We testified on this issue before the planning board, and the brief description that we were opposed didn't really give you a sense of our opposition, but our opposition is primarily that this is a growth policy amendment. It does not provide extraordinary benefits to the community. At this time in our community where housing is at such a critical shortage, we do not need more short-term rentals. And that is the main benefit of granting this growth policy amendment. The units and the development is still going to function as one plan, essentially, even with the 2 different growth policy land use designations. Changing that simply means that there will be short-term rentals instead of housing that maybe workers and families in our community can use. And so I would strongly encourage you to deny this growth policy amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Sir.
Nathan Dugan, 937 Kalispell Avenue. Didn't plan to speak on this item because the description was kind of vague and I didn't get to page 300 of the agenda to look it up. But yeah, I would agree with was it Mary? Yeah, with what Mary just said. You know, we're discussing a moratorium on short-term rentals, so I don't know how this could be something that could be approved. Looking at the map, you know, it's not like it's in the middle of the WRR zone. It's right on the edge, so we're extending that short-term boundary. I understand that they, you know, it all could be construed as part of one project, but you know, definitely we can't address our housing issues if we approve more short-term rentals. So I would ask that you guys deny it as well.
Any other member of the public? Oh, we have somebody online?
We do. Rhonda, if you'd like to go ahead and unmute your mic, you have the floor.
Thank you, Michelle. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I hadn't planned to speak on this either. I was just listening to the meeting, but I was very surprised that you would consider amending the growth policy, a process that had tremendous public input, so easily in such a minor way, to extend a tremendous benefit to the owners, but no benefit whatsoever to the community. I think it's pretty broadly agreed community-wide that we have way too much resort residential and it's being abused with way too many short-term rentals, which is basically gutting our community. So the idea that you would grant more resort residential in this really easy, quick way is almost shocking to me. I was hoping that the council would be grappling with how to reduce the amount of short-term rentals you have in the community, because the balance between people who live here and empty homes is completely out of whack. So I would certainly hope that you deny this, because I don't see it as even vaguely reasonable. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda. Any other member of the public, online or otherwise? Nope. Okay, I'll close the public hearing at this time and turn it back to council for a motion and discussion. Rebecca.
I'd like to make a motion to deny WGPA 21-01.
I'll second.
Motion is made and seconded. Rebecca, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Yep. I can definitely see our planning department's thought process in terms of creating cohesion in that area with short-term rentals all adjacent and around there. However, our community is in a dire strait right now. We've lost many, many workers. Like one of the local businessmen thinks it's been like 500 people have left because of housing, and so while in a normal situation that would be probably something that I would support because of the congruency with the other parts of the project, I don't think that I think the community conditions that have changed are that we have a dire need for real housing for real people. We don't really need many short-term rental units because not only are we being fed by within city boundaries, but we have hundreds of short-term rental opportunities just outside our city boundary in the county. And I don't think the extraordinary community benefit is there to meet a growth policy amendment. So I think it's going to be a really beautiful development when you guys are done. But at this point, what I feel like the community really needs is rental housing and not overnight short-term rentals. So that's why I'm proposing this.
Andy?
Yeah, I can't support approval of this for basically 4 reasons, and I'll take the 4 reasons will be the first 4 elements under the findings, and the first is how a specific error was made in the growth policy that necessitates an amendment to the map in order to preserve property right or preserve or achieve equal protection under the law. I can't answer positively to that question in this case. Number 2, how community conditions have changed to a degree that the amendments to the map will help facilitate achieving the community goals and overall vision for Whitefish. I think it probably does the opposite from what people are currently feeling in this community. Number 3, there is a clear and extraordinary community benefit in terms of achieving goals, resolving problems or issues, or furthering the realization of the community vision. Definitely not. I certainly do agree with the contribution that they're making on the 52 units on the other project. But as Ben asked the question, that is a standalone project, and this too is a standalone project. I do agree with staff that it will function with the other, but not allowing overnight rentals there will not make that function any less well. They're still going to be used the same drainage, they're going to use the same access, they're going to do all those things, they just can't rent them overnight. That doesn't mean it doesn't work with the other project in any way, shape, or form, unless, as a lot of people say, that they don't like short-term rentals in their neighborhood, possibly. And so maybe those 6 people wouldn't like that. And if I look at number 4 on there, how the proposed change will promote the goals and objectives of growth policy overall, I can't really answer positively to that either. I can look at number 5, how the proposed change is compatible with the existing neighborhood, and I could probably answer yes to the east, and I could probably answer yes to the south on that. And if I can look at number 6, and that's demonstrate the appropriateness of the proposed amendment location and a description of its proximity to other areas with similar land use and designation, I could probably answer pretty much a yes to that also. But when I add those numbers up, I come up with 4 no's and 2 yeses, and on that basis, I have to vote to deny.
Any other comment from council? on this matter. I would just add that I think the community benefit to this project is that it could and should be long-term rental. At any price, we need housing. And having long-term rentals is a benefit to this community, and I think that's a good reason not to accept this kind of a zone change or this kind of a growth policy change. That said, I compliment you on your project. I think it's going to look great, and I think it'll function well. And I appreciate all that you've done and are willing to do for this community. This project will also serve this community as long-term housing, and I hope you see that and hope that sits well with you. With that said, all those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed, like sign, and it passes unanimously. I'd like to move on to item E, resolution dash 2139, if I'm correct. A resolution of intention indicating, pardon?
It'll be 38 since
38.
you denied 30.
Okay, excuse me, 38. A resolution of intention indicating intent to adopt the Whitefish Highway 93 South Corridor Plan as its amendment to the 2007 Whitefish City County Master Plan. David?
Sorry, trying to get the PowerPoint working here. All right. Looks like we're on track here. So, starting back in 2018, we started the process of developing a corridor plan for Highway 93 South. And that was something that our growth policy called for. As you probably remember, the 2007 growth policy called for corridor plans for Highway 93 West, Wisconsin Avenue, and Highway 93 South. And this is the third of those three plans that we're bringing forward as amendments to our growth policy. Just as kind of a summary here, the planning area goes from about 7th Street out to about a mile past our Highway 40 intersection, and it just basically encompasses the area close to the highway as part of a corridor plan, things that are impacted by the highway. And we broke that up into 3 different segments. Segment A is close to downtown, has little unique characteristics that are different from the other segments. Segment B, which is affectionately known as the Strip in Whitefish, out to Highway 40, and then Segment C, which is south of Whitefish, going out to the edge of our former extraterritorial planning jurisdiction. And that area is all currently under the planning jurisdiction of Flathead County, but is rapidly growing and changing due to the fact that they recently rezoned that whole area to different types of commercial zoning. And so in order to review a corridor plan, just kind of do some of the summaries from the growth policy. It talked about looking at commercial growth in that area, the scale of development, architectural standards, landscaping and screening, utilities, trip generation from different types of uses in there, and then of course transportation issues such as traffic, safety, circulation, access, and then bicycle and pedestrian facilities. And so as I mentioned, we kicked off that in May of 2018. The City Council appointed a steering committee made up of business owners, property owners, a City Council member, the mayor, as well as a planning board member. We had a public open house September 2018. We had quite a bit of attendance, and then in January, February, we did visioning sessions and workshops where we had quite a few community members show up and give us input on what they would like to see in that corridor. And so we put together a list of issues and opportunities that helped kind of frame the plan, and then out of that we did visioning to figure out how we wanted that corridor to develop, and then through that visioning process we created goals and objectives for the plan. And then just more recently we had an open house in July of 2021 with a planning board work session. We did a city council work session recently, and then that went to the planning board for a public hearing in August. So some of the themes that came out of the public involvement session, you know, the corridor is an entrance to the town. It should represent what people who live here think about as Whitefish character. Abundant green space, shade trees, protected bike lanes, and other amenities that make it an enjoyable place to bike or to work. Should convey pedestrians, bicyclists, vehicle traffic in a safe and efficient manner. Should be a place where businesses serve visitors and residents alike, but without competing with or detracting from the downtown retail core. The Whitefish River should be more visible and accessible. There should be a clear distinction between the developed commercial areas within city limits and the more rural and agricultural fields south of the city. So those are some of the themes that help dictate what the goals and objectives were going to be for the plan. And so out of that plan, we had some different things that came out of the visioning session, how we wanted the community and the corridor to look in that area, looking at the streetscapes, looking at, you know, removing the culverts on the Whitefish River, looking at open space and redevelopment of commercial properties where the parking lots that front the highway would be removed and infill would be put in there, so you wouldn't be driving down a sea of parking lots, but the parking would be behind the buildings and tucked away where it's not as visible. So within each segment, we looked at land use as one of the elements, which would be zoning, architectural standards, landscaping, signs, building, parking. We looked at transportation, which is, you know, obviously it's a state highway, so some of the development on 983 is a little bit out of the city's control, but we can help dictate what happens there as part of that. And then there's obviously city streets in there, and then looking at, you know, vehicular traffic, bike and pedestrian traffic, you know, if there's opportunities for public transit, intersection control, signals, and other alternatives that would help with congestion. And then one of the final thing was environment and open space. And so we looked at access to the river, parks, trails, green space, and then if there's opportunities to acquire property or preserve green space, and then looking at water conservation and water quality. So those are the three tenets of the plan, looking at each one of those elements. And so each section of that plan, as part of our growth policy, there's a future land use map that's associated with that. And so we looked at the future land use map of each of those areas, and, you know, with the steering committee, and looked at if there's opportunities to improve that. Segment A, we didn't really have much of a change. Throughout the planning corridor that we're looking at, there were areas where the zoning was inconsistent with the future land use map. So we tried to correct some of those areas. So for instance, in segment B, there's quite a few areas where the zoning is urban zoning, but the future land use called out suburban residential. And so to make the future land use map consistent with the zoning that's already there, we looked at some changes on that. So again, future land use map for segment B. And then out in segment C, there was quite a few areas that are inconsistent with the existing zoning that was on the ground. The zoning that the county had recently adopted there. And so recognizing that that zoning is in place, but making some really clear goals and objectives that would, you know, let the county know that the city is, you know, very much opposed to expanding any of those commercial areas any further than they already are. And then looking at that segment C, one of the things that we looked at is, you know, if that area ever were to be annexed into the city, you know, how could we do that in a way that would be consistent with city values? And currently, quite a bit of that area is Zone County B4, which is the equivalent of our WB2 zoning district. And so one of the things that we came up with in this corridor plan was looking at a transitional zoning that would go in place of our WB2 if someone were to annex in. Rather than giving them straight B2 south of Highway 40, we would look at a transitional zoning district. And so for the future land use map, we have a highway transitional zoning designation, and that was something that somehow in the development of the plan and going through the steering committee, by the time I got to the planning board, Hillary and I realized that we hadn't actually created a summary of what that highway transitional future land use was. We talked about the zoning and what that zoning might look like. And so we put together a kind of an overview of what the highway transitional zoning would look like. And then that was something that we brought to the planning board and they reviewed that. And so looking at that, I mean, I don't want to read that whole thing. It's pretty wordy, but you guys can take a look at that if you need to. And then there's also a business service center in that zoning, or in that segment from south of Highway 40. And we already have that in our growth policy as a future land use. In our former planning jurisdiction, there was a chunk of business service district out by Dillon Road and Highway 40 that we had in our zoning district. So that's already in there, so we don't have to add that in. As part of any corridor plan, there's implementation activities that are laid out in the plan. And so the corridor plan basically talks about how we implement the plan, how do we implement the goals and objectives of this particular plan. And we laid out who's going to be responsible for each of those things, description of the action and a time frame, who the stakeholders are, what resources might be needed to do that, and then which of the specific goals are addressed by that. And so there's some of them are city actions, some of them are city-county actions where we need to jointly work with the county. Some of them are city and Montana Department of Transportation actions, and then some might be public-private partnership in order to fulfill the plan. And so some of the specific things would be revising our landscaping standards to have some specific things in relation to that corridor, our parking standards, looking at some outdoor storage and screening standards for light assembly and manufacturing, revising our sign district along Baker Avenue north of East 13th Street. That area is part of our highway sign district. However, along Baker Avenue there with its 25-mile-an-hour speed limit, I don't think we need highway district size signs if there was a commercial development out there. Looking at our architectural review standards for multi-tenant commercial buildings, bringing forward that new transitional zoning district that would be applied if we were to annex any property south of Highway 40, getting that adopted into the zoning code. And then there's also an overlay or sub-district in segment A that we were going to need to look at. Looking at the special provisions chapter that we have for lots, specific some of the standards in the B2 zoning district with regard to setbacks and things like that are things that we're going to need to change. And then also amending our annexation policy, which I think we've been working on. We're going to have a work session here in another month or two on that. Looking at further developing the Whitefish River Trail as well as the canoe park to make that more accessible to the public. Again, having specific opposition to any commercial zoning expansion in segment C, and then discouraging any proposed projects in that segment that's in the county that's inconsistent with the city's vision for that segment of the corridor, or with any of the goals or policies in our code, or within Flathead County's own growth policy. And then I'm not going to go through all these, but some of these are different goals that and implementation activities that we need to work with MDT on, looking at speed limit reductions and just other improvements in there. And then some of the city-county actions, looking at some, encouraging the county to have a zoning compliance permit so that when they do approve commercial projects in that segment that aren't going to annex in, that they actually enforce their own codes. And then continue to foster a dialogue with some coordinated planning with the city and the county. And then looking at some public-private partnerships with the bus pullouts and shelters for park and ride opportunities, as well as the snow bus stop, and then looking at some other easements along the Whitefish River and around the Highway 40 intersection. So we had specific goals and objectives as part of that. Land use goals, establishing a theme for segment A to indicate the entrance to downtown and business core 2 blocks north, and the transitional nature of the segment between highway commercial, surrounding residential, and downtown. Again, I mentioned the sign district changes, encourage commercial and mixed-use development appropriate to the scale and transitional nature of that segment. Some of the goals in segment A, transportation goals, looking at improving safety, capacity, aesthetics of that segment, looking at promoting bike and pedestrian facilities as multimodal transportation. Again, I mentioned the bridge that would replace those culverts, both from an aesthetic perspective, but I think it would also help with fish passage through there and some other things. And then any new replacement bridges would need to be designed to accommodate pedestrians and bicycles, facilitate river access and views, and accommodate flower boxes, landscaping, and also be compatible with adjacent neighborhoods and complement each other as an active transition as you're going into downtown. As far as environment and open space in segment A, looking at highlighting the multiple values and provide better public access to the river, increasing public green space, looking at the landscaping requirements. Segment B, looking at improving the visual character and the built environment in that area. That's always been the knock on the strip, is the aesthetics, and coming up with different ways that we can, as development moves forward, that we would improve those aesthetics and the visual character of that, as well as compatibility with adjacent land uses, and then looking at types of development that would help diversify the economy of Whitefish, provide higher wages and salaries, and support existing and new housing and employment. It's one area where we have a lot of large lots with land that could be developed for not only light industrial that we could create jobs, but also multifamily housing. It seems like we're sort of been pushing it out that direction. And while it's not as pedestrian and bicycle friendly as high density in the downtown, it is an opportunity there to create housing is something that we desperately need in our community. Transportation goals, looking at improving traffic flows and aesthetics, opportunities for bicycles and multimodal transportation. And as far as open space and environment, public access to the natural areas in the green space, looking at the road right-of-way in segment B and how do we make that more aesthetically pleasing by adding additional trees and shrubs rather than just having a lawn through there. And then looking at our requirements for landscaping to use mostly native species with minimal watering requirements. That ties into our climate action plan and some of our public works goals. Then out in segment C, south of Highway 40, encouraging Valley County to enforce their zoning, their highway overlay and sign standards. Again, discouraging uses that aren't consistent with our vision out there. Limiting future commercial and light industrial development to properties that are currently zoned secondary business district. And then fostering some joint planning, ensuring that anything annexed in is developed in a manner consistent with our community vision. That's where that transitional zone comes in. Prioritizing infill within the city over commercial development out in the county, and then bring non-conforming signs and things into our compliance with our regulations. Several of them out there that don't comply with our standards. As far as traffic goes, looking at traffic safety in that segment, reducing the speed potentially, improving intersection safety, looking at opportunities for frontage roads and backage roads to help not having so many cars pull out on the highway. It's not on this slide, but that's one of the things. And then improving opportunities for bicyclists, pedestrians, carpoolers, and transit users out there. And as far as the goals and open space, try to preserve some forested land out there, maintain the rural feel of that segment, protect water quality, minimize the need for irrigation. Talked about the implementation items already. So that's pretty much the PowerPoint summary. And looking at amending our growth policy, just kind of quickly I'll go through the staff report that's on page 458. I've already kind of given you a summary of what the plan's doing. I'd be glad to answer some specific questions on that, but looking at requirements under the growth policy and our relationship with that. You know, one of the goals of the growth policy was to plan for healthy, efficient, and visually attractive corridors along major transportation routes throughout the community. We have multiple goals and objectives that do promote healthy, efficient, and visually attractive corridor. Looking at signs, safety, aesthetics, bike and pedestrian facilities, the bridge appearance, visual character, traffic flow. So many of the goals and objectives of the plan help implement that goal of the growth policy. And the growth policy also talks about shall facilitate the formulation of corridor plans for all major transportation corridors. And again, this plan specifically implements that policy of our growth policy to create a corridor plan for that area of the city. And so over that 3-year period of the creation of this, with many steering committee meetings and many public outreach and many visioning sessions and work sessions, again, we are facilitating that corridor plan as part of the growth policy. And so staff did recommend approval of this. We did have a hearing before the planning board in August. We did present that to the planning board. There was a couple of public comments at the meeting. We had one resident of Baker Avenue, Ryan Kiefer, that was felt like there wasn't enough consideration for impacts to Baker Avenue as part of the highway corridor that might be expanded through there. That we need to potentially look at a bypass study again. And then Citizens for a Better Flathead also provided a letter asking for some fresh perspective on the plan, and then looking at possible peer review for the plan before adoption. Since that meeting, in fact today we had quite a few comments come in, and over the last couple weeks specifically talking about, and I think it has to do with some of the business owners that are looking for areas to possibly do some employee housing in the community, and have identified some areas out on that corridor as a potential location for some, maybe some higher density development. Currently, the future land use map of the plan, as shown as in the draft, does call for urban density along outside of the general commercial. And so within that urban density, there is opportunity for, higher density development with regard to, urban, but that's, WR2 is the highest density allowed in the urban core. The WB2 commercial zone allows a little bit higher density. It's still not quite as high density as WR4. I think there was some concern that, if we had some multifamily, higher density residential, it would make it more economically feasible to develop employee housing in that corridor. And there's some specific areas. I highlighted a specific lot that I think there's some of the business owners are looking at out there that they'd like to see higher density on. And as you can see on the existing zoning map, that particular lot is in the county currently, but it has an R3 zone, which is the equivalent of our WR1, which is 10,000 square feet per lot per unit. So that may come up in the public comments. I just wanted to highlight that. We also received a couple things right at 5 o'clock tonight. I didn't have a chance to look them over because had interviews till 5 and then had to get ready for this meeting. But I believe there's a packet of stuff on the table on each of your desks with some additional materials that were delivered. So the public hearing, after the public hearing, the planning board did recommend 5-1 to approve the corridor plan, and they forwarded it on to the city council. You guys have any questions for me? I'd be glad to attempt to answer them.
Any questions? Oh, Rebecca?
Thank you. And first, we just got this right before we started meeting, and so I'm wondering if we could maybe continue. That's just a thought. The main reason I wonder that is because there's some legal challenges in these papers, and like one of them is whether or not you can accept corridor plans without updating the growth policy. So right now the growth policy is 5 years overdue. Is that right? Because we're supposed to be doing an update every 10 years, right? So right now we're 5 years over the growth policy, but we've got 2 out of 3 corridor plans done. But how does that work legally though? Because this is the first time and I can't say I read it greatly, but I didn't even know that we could be non-compliant with the state law till I read these comments.
Well, we've adopted several amendments to our growth policy since we adopted our growth policy. Several neighborhood plans have been adopted. Our downtown master plan is a great example. That's something that's adopted as an update and amendment to our growth policy, as well as our other 2 corridor plans. And so, I mean, we believe that it's legal to amend our growth policy, because otherwise all those documents would be invalid.
Okay, and Angie, you concur that there's no issues, or do you need time to look at it?
Rebecca, I haven't had time. It's
Okay.
kind of hard for me when I get stuff at 5 o'clock, right
Yeah,
before
yeah,
the
yeah. I
meeting, to
know.
even
Yeah,
read it, let
no.
alone provide any sort of meaningful comment.
Okay. I just think we should clarify that since it's brought up by some attorneys. And the other question I had is, how much has the MDT been involved? Because on Wednesday, as Toby has reminded the public, at the O'Shaughnessy, there's an open house to do the design work for incoming traffic into downtown. And so have they been involved the whole time, or have we been waiting for some of what their decision-making will be about that?
No, they have been involved from the beginning. They had sent representatives to many of our meetings and our steering committee meetings. And we had, invited them early on in the process. We've continually updated them with, our goals and objectives and some of our ideas for the plan. We've given them the information. We hired Bob Abilene of Abilene Traffic Services to do a study of some of the traffic issues in the corridor, and looking at if we could do improvements, if roundabouts would improve traffic. And we did some thorough analysis of all those types of things, and we, shared all that stuff with MDT. Looked at 13th Street, just adding a second lane southbound would, significantly increase the, capacity of that intersection. That's something that, and they already knew that, but that was something that we verified with our traffic engineer that we hired. So, there's a lot of coordination there.
And then the county, have you had much conversation with the county?
Several of the meetings, the former county planning director, Mark Mussman, attended. We kept him in the loop, sent him all the information. They kind of stopped attending. We did, when we had the final draft, we sent it to their acting planning director. He did look it over. He had a couple of comments. But, they haven't been super actively involved.
Just because you're hoping for a zoning compliance permit for the transitional area?
That'd be one way to help, them be able to review things in the county and hold, the developers accountable for whatever they're doing. It's difficult if you don't have a process, and you just have to see what they end up with and see if it complies,
Yeah, that's been hard to watch out there, actually. Okay, that's all.
Any other questions for David at this time? Ben?
Dave, just to address some of the comment, we got a couple comments in here about bringing higher density residential projects in. What is that process? So let's just say that this council adopts this plan as proposed, and like this workforce housing projects or others that wish to annex into the city at a higher density classification, what does that process look like from there?
Well, currently, if you look at the future land use map, that's what dictates what zoning can go in there. And so, we do allow some density bonuses with, if someone's doing workforce housing and they're willing to do 10%, we just amended our Legacy Homes program to do a voluntary program. And so there is some potential increase in density that could be happening, if somebody wanted to do something in an R2, and then with the density bonus, they may be able to make something work. And then, with the B2 zoning is also zoned for multifamily out there. So, there's potential room for property out there. But, the specific thing with annexation, most of the property that's on the edge of the, that corridor is in the suburban areas. And I personally don't think that, high density residential is appropriate there. But, that particular lot that it's circled on the map there, has, industrial on one side and commercial on the other. That lot might be, appropriate for high density, or a commercial zoning that would allow higher density. But in general, as a blanket statement, looking at, changing it to high density through there, I think maybe where it's the urban designation in that corridor, I think that there's a potential that some of that urban, especially where it abuts the commercial zoning, we could look at, you know, like a WR4 or higher density residential, but that wouldn't have anything to do with annexation. Because, you know, those areas that are outside of that corridor that aren't in the city, like I said, most of those are, you know, a suburban or even rural zoning.
So anybody that wanted to do that would have to file an application.
A growth
just like the
policy
one we saw
amendment like we
earlier.
saw tonight with the, you know, resort residential and going through that process and then change the zoning. You know, I think, you know, part of the, you know, because I had a discussion with that doctor and those guys and just specifically about that lot. And I said, you know, I told them, you know, here's an opportunity rather than have to go through that process of amending the growth policy. You know, you could talk to the city council about potentially looking at that property and specifically, you know, and looking at a different future land use so that, you know, if you were to want to come back with a zone change, you wouldn't have to do the growth policy amendment part of it too, which would just further, you know, make it more of a hassle. And so I think that's where some of these letters came from, was just out of that discussion.
Any other questions for Dave at this time or anyone else? Not seeing any. We advertised for a public hearing on our resolution -21-38. I'll open that public hearing at this time. Any member of the public wish to speak, please step forward.
Toby Scott, 1478 Barclay Lane. You've seen me before on this subject or similar to it. I think that the Highway 93 South Corridor plan is lovely for the most part. A lot of the amenities and everything are just a great thing. However, in the consideration of the plan, they didn't consider some of these things such as rezoning. And rezoning for the purpose of high-density residential housing, you know, specifically rental housing for some of our workforce. And so at this time, I would encourage you to amend this future land use map of the Highway 93 South Corridor plan to either require or allow any property annexed into the city be zoned high-density residential, if requested, regardless of the county zoning. This new zoning, I would hope, be either WR3 or WR4, or at least WB2. This would allow maximum density of the housing. County zoning was established years ago and was without any knowledge of our current need for housing. I've spoken to the Strategic Housing Committee that made up of 3 members of your council, and they had several reports and agreed that even at the time the reports were made in 2016 and 2017, they wanted to implement things, but it isn't until now do they and most of the people in Whitefish realize we need to do something now. And so therefore, any of these zoning changes should include county or city industrial, WB, anything like that. Make it so that if they're annexed into the city, they can be rezoned to a high-density residential. And as David just explained, without this amendment, any zoning requested by a developer or other person is going to be very difficult and require a variance to the growth policy. And you've already denied one tonight on that, for that. And in your presentation there, Dave pointed out that in the segment B goal, item number B3 referred to housing, and also in the implementation action area, item number 10 was regarding annexation, and there are other references to zoning. So I'd like you to try and find a way to create some sort of amendment to this corridor plan that would allow a rezoning of at least anything annexed, so that we could perhaps find a way to annex it and build affordable rental housing for our workforce. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. Any other public comment? Please.
Good evening, councilors. My name is Phil Boland. I reside at 12 Green Place in Whitefish. I'm not as eloquent as Toby is, but as a person in sales, I daily visit with businesses in the Flathead and hear of their woes regarding the staggering loss of their employees and how this loss affects them personally, their customers, and how they've had to adjust their life to the fact that they simply don't have the staff to operate their businesses successfully. This is especially so in Whitefish. The economic loss may be calculable, but the emotional loss is not. Obviously, our businesses depend on a reliable and consistent labor force. As a former business owner, I empathize with these business owners' needs. Our businesses in Whitefish can't operate, and our residents and tourists can't enjoy this wonderful city without an adequate supply of workers to fill all of the open jobs we see in town. As was stated earlier this evening, there's been at least 500 employees leaving the vicinity this year because of lack of housing. The only way to bring in more workers is to provide housing and transportation for them. As the old saying goes, build it and they will come. As such, I request amending the future land use map of the 93 South Corridor so that the future land use shown for any parcel annexed, it is high-density residential, which would allow it to be zoned WR3 or WR4 for even more density of workforce housing, or as a secondary business so it can be zoned W2 rather than urban. It is imperative that this amendment be made for the corridor plan. If the future land use plan of the 93 corridor is not amended, then that parcel is annexed. It will get the city equivalent of zoning to the existing county zoning. If it is not changed now, then it will require a growth policy amendment to be done prior to any future zone change that differs from future land use map designation. At this time, any zone change must be consistent with the future land use map of the growth policy. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Any other public comment?
Good evening again, Mary Flowers, Citizens for a Better Flathead. And you should have gotten one of the comments that we sent in at 4 o'clock today in your packet that includes hopefully some colored maps. Were the maps included as well? Are there no maps? Yes, no? Yes, there are? Okay. Frank's saying no.
I haven't spotted them yet, but carry on.
Okay.
I see him now.
Okay, thank you. Again, I'm representing Citizens for a Better Flathead and the numerous city of Whitefish and surrounding area residents that we represent as an organization. We are before you in what appears your final night of decision on this quarter plan. I would note that we've recently been doing some work in Kalispell and attending some public hearings there. And I was delighted to find that Kalispell has a policy that they never make a decision on the same night that they host a public hearing. And they do that, and they were shocked to me to learn that you don't do that. When I talked to council members there that said, we don't have time to really consider the public information, that's what a public hearing's for. So we always schedule our decision on a night after the public hearing. So I would encourage you to look at that. It's a refreshing and much more respectful way than trying to belt out here at the late hour, points that we hope you will consider. And I do appreciate that you are very committed to considering public comment, but I think this would be easier on both you and the public. We also asked, you should have before you the comments that we made at the planning board. We outlined 8 particular points that we felt were important that you take, that you pause and don't adopt this plan currently, but look at those. And I want to in particular go over some expanded comments on some of those points. And in that regard, we ask that our prior comments, both at the planning board and at the prior work sessions, be made part of this hearing record tonight. We would urge you to strip this plan of its ill-proposed, ill-conceived, and very likely illegal process of amending the text of the Whitefish growth policy through this proposed, the text and maps of this proposed, through this proposed corridor plan. And this is kind of outlined on page of your council packet 459, 461. Which, if adopted, would immediately amend the 2007 growth policy. The Montana Supreme Court has held that the piecemeal and inconsistent amendments to a growth policy violates the comprehensive role of that growth policies should play in guiding growth. The Whitefish growth policy map and text amendments for segment C particularly, and also some proposed for segment B, because of their flawed process. But the ones for C will only serve to lock in and endorse zoning inconsistent with the Whitefish growth policy, comprehensive policies, and tie your hands going forward in saying no to more highway commercial sprawl down Highway 93 as properties annex into the city. Instead, the council should table this corridor plan and follow the proper procedures to amend the Whitefish growth policy. Similar to what Kalispell has done in developing pages, and I think it's about 5 or 6 pages in their growth policy, specifically devoted to future annexation policies within this, for the city of Whitefish. And when I say future, that is outside of their city limits that their policies address. The annexation policy for Whitefish should make housing a clear priority for future annexation of land into the city. This annexation policy should not be done as part of this corridor plan. You should be done as a separate document and as part of your growth policy update. But we think it should be prioritized and move quickly forward, because you need a plan that really enables you to address the critical housing shortage in our community. The goal of this annexation for housing was already set forth in the 2017 Whitefish Strategic Housing Plan, where it states, a primary purpose of the recommended annexation policy is to preserve the Whitefish community as it grows, with the goal to reverse the trend towards more second homes relative to primary residence occupied by locals. So we want to see residents living in homes and not more second homes, which is the trend in our community. Second homes increased 10 percentage points between 2000 and 2010. Annexation of land upon request by property owners for residential development offered the single largest opportunity to stabilize the relationship between primary and secondary homes. It goes on to suggest that you develop and adopt annexation policies requiring 75 to 80% of the homes developed on properties annexed into Whitefish in the future be deed restricted. I would also encourage you to note that at your recent public hearing on the Whitefish Extension of Services Plan, the Whitefish Chamber testified that its board voted 9-1 that you not adopt the Extension of Services Plan as proposed, but that you first move forward with this annexation policy called for in the 2017 Strategic Housing Plan and devote a higher priority to your efforts to addressing the long-term housing needs of the city, especially workforce housing. CBF, our organization, also strongly supported that recommendation. You went ahead and extended your extension of services plan outside the city limits, but you now have the opportunity to hit the pause button and really work on this annexation policy to address more effectively our housing needs. A comparison of the three maps that I have included, the current Whitefish growth policy map, the proposed map of the Highway Corridor 93 Corridor Plan map, which would immediately amend the growth policy, and the current and the adopted future land use plan annexation map for Kalispell show a stark contrast between the approach that Whitefish has historically taken and the approach that Kalispell has taken to newly proposed growth policy map amendments and annexing property into the city. And I want to I'd ask that you look at these maps just a minute, and because it's probably easier for you to see, the first map that I've attached is the future land use map of your 2007 growth policy. I would note if you follow that down to the area that is covered by the current proposed corridor plan, south of Highway 40, that is rural residential. This plan would amend that map and overlay essentially the zoning as part of this growth policy amendment. It would change the land uses to pretty much reflect, with some tweaks to call for, some as conditional use, whatever. But essentially, I think it ties your hand by changing your 2007 growth policy that should clearly be stripped out of this current corridor plan. If you go down to the next map, this is the future land use map that is currently in place for the city of Kalispell. If you look at this, again, going north, they have identified the areas along the highway as suburban residential. This clearly informs how they annex property into the city of Kalispell. The little pink dots that are scattered in there, those are where they have designated appropriate areas around the city where neighborhood commercial may be considered. You will not see proposals for long strips of commercial development as would be proposed in the change, this corridor plan. And finally, the last set of maps here show the changes in the corridor plan, which would essentially overlay the uses that the county has supported and are not in any way, we would argue, in line with the vision that the city residents support. We feel that what you need to do is leave your current 2007 map in place and to really support that map with additional goals in your growth policy. Note that the steering committee that was part of the Highway 93 corridor plan, that two of those members, Roger Sherman and Marilyn Nelson, both presented strong opposition to the adoption of this plan. And I would argue that many of the points we've raised in our comments were similar to the ones that they raised in urging you to have a peer review of this plan. You've put together a lot of good resource information. A peer review can be done that looks at, are there better tools to really address the vision of the community? And that's, I think, what you need to do. I would also note that the city has no legal obligation to accept annexation requests if they do not support a pattern of growth the city wants to encourage as set forth in the growth policy currently. However, this proposed change to the growth policy, we believe, will put the city in legal jeopardy if you go forward and deny annexation of the commercial uses the county has zoned this property outside of the city, because you will have now adopted that almost verbatim into your growth policy. Finally, we ask that you table this corridor plan, make sure what you're proposing and the way you're doing it is legal, and get much needed outside professional planner peer review of a plan to ensure it includes the best solutions and tools for guiding future growth. Whitefish has never shared the vision of commercial strips along the highways connecting the three cities. Whitefish has until recently been an affordable small town that was a prized place to live, work, and play. It's time to take steps to reclaim that vision and to develop an annexation policy that encourages real neighborhoods as the city grows. This emphasis, we feel, should be on single-family, affordable neighborhoods that the Whitefish Housing Planning identifies as a top priority of Whitefish residents, as well as the more immediate shortage of workforce housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Anyone else wish to speak on this matter?
Good evening, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. I won't waste a lot of your time. Tom Gilfillan, Whitefish Pottery, 242 Central Avenue. I thought you should hear from a business owner and how affordable housing or workforce housing affects me, a business owner. I was one of the first business owners in Whitefish after being here for 27 years. I was one of the first business owners in town to be open on Sundays. I took a chance. I was open on Sundays. I stayed open on Sundays, good profit. I was one of the first businesses, I was the first business in Whitefish to stay open till 9 p.m. from Memorial Day to Labor Day. Now over 60% of the businesses from that time period are open till 9 p.m. Right now, if you've been down to Whitefish Pottery at all, probably haven't, I know everybody's busy. I've had a sign in my window since day one of Memorial Day weekend looking for work. Whitefish Pottery, who has led an example in downtown Whitefish for 22 and a half years, now has a sign on its door that we are closed Sunday and Monday because I can't find employees. That has to do with affordable housing and workforce housing. Anything you do to this master plan growth period should include areas that will afford more housing for workers and affordable housing. I ditto what Mr. Toby Scott says, and I ditto what Mary says. I'm not going to go into everything. I won't take up your time this evening. It's another late meeting. On one other point, I would like to say thank you to whoever was involved in changing the speed limit from 45 to 35 in front of the golf course. I've hounded the city council about that for years now, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comment this evening?
Nathan Dugan, 937 Kalispell Avenue. Yeah, when I look at the map, kind of with how the zoning is and the future predicted use, I see way too much one-family zoning. Given kind of the nature of the housing crisis and the lamenting that we like to do, that the city killed our inclusionary zoning program, we should definitely not be creating more exclusionary zoning, one-family zoning, within the confines of the law. Of course, I know you can't spot zone things and things of that nature, but so not only should we not be introducing, when we annex properties into the city, more one-family zoning, but we should be trying to eliminate the one-family zoning, I think, that exists in Whitefish generally, to a minimum of the WR2 zone, which is where I live, and all the houses there currently are single-family homes, but it opens our options up in the future. I think that from a practical standpoint, this area, especially kind of the south of Highway 40 area, although it's not incredibly walkable, it's bikeable with a little bit of infrastructure. As somebody that rides my bike everywhere in Whitefish because I don't want to deal with parking, If I lived out there currently, I don't know that I would ride my bike on Highway 93 or on the sidewalks next to it. It's just not a very pleasurable experience. So there obviously needs to be some infrastructure there, but I do think that is probably the most palatable area from a practical standpoint for us to put higher density multifamily rental housing, higher density housing for purchase. That is close enough to the city that it kind of limits the amount of sprawl that we're doing, at least in the short term, keeps people involved in the community, feel like they're a part of the community. Happy Valley, I think that's farther out than all this, if I'm correct on that, but those people I think have always felt like they've been a part of the community, so anybody within this corridor, I think could still participate in the community and feel like they're a part of the community as well without pushing them too far out to where they don't feel that need, they don't feel that, or they start to go somewhere else to do their shopping and eating and that sort of thing because it's more convenient. And so, I think that this is the best place to kind of put that sort of stuff, and however you think is best to do that, whether it's in this plan or creating a separate annexation policy as was suggested earlier. I think that we should work to increase WR3, WR4 zoning in that corridor to increase our housing supply, which, theoretically at least will decrease our prices, make it more affordable for people to live here. At a bare minimum, we need way more rentals than we have right now because there's just nothing to rent. So fortunately, don't have to deal with that, but I know a lot of people that do, and I know you all do as well. So thanks for hearing me out.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? One more time, Toby?
Frank?
Yes,
We
ma'am.
do have somebody online.
Okay. Toby, and then we'll go there. Thank you.
Yeah, Toby Scott, 1478 Barclay Lane in Whitefish. I just wanted to suggest that if you can't come up with the text for an amendment to allow the annexation zoning changes, I suggest you table this until the next meeting or till at such time as you could come up with the text for an amendment, rather than just go, well, it's just as easy to just pass it right now tonight and no amendment, and we're screwed for any high-density housing rezoning once this goes through. Thank you.
Thanks, Toby. Michelle?
Michelle Weinberg, if you'd like to unmute your mic, you'll have the floor.
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Michelle Weinberg, 116 Lubfer Avenue, representing the South Whitefish Neighborhood Association. Mr. Mayor and Honorable Council, the corridor plan should not be adopted as drafted. It purports to change the future land use designations of certain areas covered by the growth policy, for example, from suburban residential to urban, in contravention of the Montana Supreme Court's Ash Grove decision. In Ash Grove, which I've cited to you in detail in my public comment on behalf of South Whitefish Neighborhood Association, Justices Liebhart and Nelson authored a concurring opinion which further expanded upon the public policy rationale and inherent dangers of the type of piecemeal planning contained in the corridor plan. They said, although the law allows for the amendment of comprehensive master plans, it does not envision piecemeal amendment or partial repeal through the adoption of junior documents, which are inconsistent with the, quote, master plan. The sort of comprehensive plan at issue here is, in truth, the very antithesis of what is contemplated by Montana's planning laws. It invites avoidance of what the law requires, a well-thought-out, long-range, detailed, and comprehensive planning document that takes into consideration past, present, and anticipated land uses throughout the jurisdiction, and which is debated and adopted in an atmosphere that is free, to the extent possible, from the influence of special interests and political expedience. To that end, it is worth revisiting the public process that led to the adoption of the 2007 growth policy, which included 16 visioning sessions. In contrast, only one visioning session was held in advance of the drafting of this plan, in addition to 2 open house meetings. The association is particularly concerned with how this plan would open the door to higher density residential development on the west side of Highway 93 in Segment B, despite the natural resource values and environmental constraints present in the area. It is worth noting that even during the January 2019 visioning meeting, participants recommended that, for example, the vacant land between JP Road and Parknell Lane be limited to an average of 125 total units, which is already possible under the suburban residential land use designation. If the designation is changed to urban, over 200 units could be built by right, and hundreds more if the area is zoned WR2 with a residential PUD. For these reasons, and for the reasons explained in the public comment I submitted this afternoon, the association respectfully requests that the council not adopt the resolution of intention and that it remove any changes to the land use designation from the plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rhonda, if you would like to unmute your mic, you have the floor.
I'm unmuted. I'm Rhonda Fitzgerald, 412 Lupfer Avenue. I did participate in this process of developing the corridor plan from the beginning. I attended the visioning session, which was quite robust, a lot of participation, but there was only one. I think David Taylor mentioned many, but there was one visioning session at a hotel, the Hampton Inn. And I also participated in the online survey that was a follow-up to that. And I attended, I think, all but one of the steering committee meetings. And I will say that I was frequently the only member of the public there. And sometimes there were 1 or 2 other people. Mary Flowers from Citizens for a Better Flathead was there frequently. The committee changed hands many times, so people came and left because they moved away. So the committee ended with a completely different makeup than it started, and there was one member who I think missed 2 full years of meetings. So it hasn't been what I would call a robust public process, but nevertheless, throughout, a lot of really good information was collected, and I think the plan offers a lot of great ideas and insight and guideposts for the future. But as it progressed south, it got a lot less concrete. And by the time the discussion got to the segment C discussion, there wasn't very much information at all. And I think that that was referenced in the presentation from staff, that the whole transitional zone was never discussed in the steering committee. This has come at the very last minute, and I think would stand more review from the public and from the steering committee, because that's the kind of thing that needs to be better understood about this corridor plan than just something added at the end by staff. It has not met the requirement of public review, and I think a lot of the other public comment tonight points out that this is just not quite ready, because the community needs a more solid plan to address all of the challenges that we have currently. It's a good plan, but it's not done. And so I hope that you will take a step back and we can work on it a little bit longer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rhonda. Any other public comment this evening on this matter? Nothing online? Seeing no one approaching the mic now, I'll close the public hearing and turn the matter back to council for a motion and discussion. Rebecca.
Make a motion to continue this hearing with public comment open, but I don't know till when. Like, I know we're probably pretty jammed. Can we, do we have to pick a certain date, Dana?
I don't believe so. Now, this is just a resolution of intention to adopt, so you would be holding another public hearing after this individual item. You know, this is, I believe, up to council.
Okay.
If you guys want to continue it. But I don't know what would change between now and then, though. I mean, I think maybe more time for you to digest the public comments you've received, and we could review some of the legal concerns as well.
And then if I get a second, I can speak to that.
Rebecca, do you really mean that you want to table this matter to a date certain as opposed to continue this matter?
Isn't it, if I table it, we don't ever have to bring it back onto the table unless we want to, but if I continue it, then we have a certain date that we would assign to it, right? So I don't want it to be out there forever.
Agreed, and
But-
I guess I'll, Angie, is it continue or table to a date certain?
I would continue it to a date certain.
Okay, thank you. So you have a date certain?
Well,
If you don't want it left open forever, it would be,
do I pick the date? I think we have a really big agenda. That's why, like, I don't know when to put it on our agenda. Should I say in 2 weeks, or should I say in a month?
I think you can ask Dana as to what might work if that's what your intent is.
That's what I just did.
We're gonna,
Okay.
assuming that this is coming back to a city council meeting and not a work session, I believe you could continue it to the next meeting. Staff should have time to review that. We do have 3 public hearings currently scheduled for our next meeting, so adding a 4th one isn't abnormal.
Okay. If that's, then we'll do that. That would be my proposal.
Your motion is to continue this matter until our next meeting, leaving the public hearing open.
Correct.
I would second that.
Seconded by Counselor. Do you wish to discuss your motion, Rebecca?
Primarily, I'd like Angie to look at the legal arguments that were brought up, making sure that we're compliant. We've been doing things for a long time. We knew that we were behind on our growth policy update, but I just feel like she's just seen it, and it would be better to wait a little bit to make sure that we are compliant with all of that. Another issue that's been brought up repeatedly by people is whether or not if we annex a county property adjacent to this corridor that we're going to be voting on, whether or not everything in the corridor should be high density as a mandate is kind of what I'm thinking that these people are proposing as a way to avoid a growth policy update and a zoning change. And I'm not sure that that's an appropriate thing to add into the corridor plan when we have other ways of doing that. But I think that should be clarified with the people that have concerns about that. I think if we mandate what the density would be to a property of someone that, if someone owns the property and they want to annex in, I think they have property rights as to what they want to come in to do with their property. And so I don't want to take away those rights from somebody else just because we have a proposal that might be coming through for housing. And the other thing, excuse me, at one point we did talk, someone brought this up to me, was getting Crandall and Arambula to participate in possibly an overview of what's going to happen down there. I know they're downtown planning experts, but they're excellent. Did I get their names right? Crandall and Arambula? Yeah. Everything they told us about designing downtown turned out accurate and beautiful. And I'm just wondering if we had someone like that to help us, because it still feels really kind of clunky with the zoning down in the south end of the corridor. And so those are the only ones that I know have worldwide experience, and they work with cities all the time, and we were so pleased with what they did for our downtown corridor. I'm just wondering about if we could reach out to them to see if they would consider helping us with this so that it looks aesthetically pleasing but also is functional and ties into our downtown corridor in a way that brings us all the goals as well. So, all right, I better be quiet so we can go home sometime.
Any other comments from any other member of council? Ben?
Yeah, I seconded Rebecca's motion because I do feel like there's 50 pages of material here that I haven't had a chance to read. And I feel I personally would also benefit from some additional time to process some of the comments that were made tonight. And I know that for me, one thing I want to spend a little more time looking at is actual maps. I know I was reading a lot of text and thinking about that, but I also feel like I need to spend a little more time looking at the actual layout of which properties and where the lines are drawn and stuff like that. So anyway, I feel like I would personally benefit from some additional time here.
Great, thank you. Any other comments?
Quick question for Michelle.
Great.
Michelle, did you get the email from the attorney that came in today, I think at like 4 o'clock? Yes. Was there any more to this email? Because it looks incomplete to me. Well, I know she cited us a Supreme Court case, but I just pulled it up on the Supreme Court website, and there's a 4-page dissent that's missing. Was that on purpose, or?
The email she sent me had 19 pages.
I can speak to that if you'd like. It's Michelle Weinberg.
Would you like her to speak towards that?
I'm not asking for that.
You guys have to address her. I can't.
Michelle, the question is, did we get the dissent as part of the package or not?
So you have, I was just reviewing, you do have, Dana just reviewed, you do have the full package of what I received.
Okay.
Okay. I think that answers my question,
Okay.
Michelle. And that came in at 4 o'clock today?
324.
Okay. And that case was decided in 1997. So I can see the rush on that. I don't have any further comments.
Yeah, just a couple comments. I'm perfectly fine with waiting a couple of weeks here, and I guess what I would probably encourage us to do is give a little better direction to staff. I think we really only heard comments about housing, period. We didn't hear about anything else of all of the things that are in there. I think if we look at some of the submittals from Mary, and I think if we look at the bunch of the emails and we listen to the other people, and we're hearing actually kind of two different competing things about housing there. I'm hearing WR4 and I'm hearing single-family neighborhoods. So that's something that obviously is not universally agreed to amongst those that are talking about housing. Particularly when I look at the South, Highway 93 South Neighborhood Association, anything that's ever had any density that's ever even come close to our desk has been wildly opposed by them. So I think we need to be conscious of that. But I mean, I guess what I would like to do is, if we can, I think housing and annexation policy, and that housing being towards a look at some greater density possibly, that's one thing we're hearing, Dave, that maybe we would want to have a little feedback on between now and the next 2 weeks. But other than that, I'm not really hearing too much from the public, and I think, I'm more than willing to take some time, but I think we all do need to be conscious of the fact we've been at this for 40 months. 40? First meeting was May of 2018. It's 2021 right now. That's 40 months. It's a long time. Now, granted, we had COVID in there, and I understand kind of part of what you were asking in comparing with the downtown neighborhood plan. We're dealing with a much broader area, Rebecca, and I think trying to take something that works in a several block area and translate it out over miles and a lot of rural land and that kind of thing is probably unrealistic in the time frame before I die, probably would be my guess. But I guess what I would encourage us to do is look at those things. If Dave, you can bring some of that back, that would be very, very helpful to me. And then I would encourage us to at least pass the resolution of intent in 2 weeks. We're not committed to the plan at that point. We're just saying we're willing to move forward and would go forward with an ordinance after that and would have continued public hearing. We could set that time. We're not under a time crunch at that point. Once we pass the resolution, we know we're going to move forward because I got news for you. I want to move forward at some point. I want to pass a resolution of intent and I want to get a corridor plan passed for Highway 93 South. So my intent is that, yes, we're going to do that. And I think stalling tonight is fine, I think, because we can answer some of those questions, but I would really encourage us to not come back and not pass not pass the resolution in 2 more weeks. Pass that, and then we can move forward with the ordinance, and we can tweak, and we can look in a work session or whatever. But, 40 months is a long time, and it's one of the problems with the public process is it does take a very, very, very long time. And sadly, 4 years, conditions change on the ground while you're moving along, so we kind of need to get her done at some point. So that's my comments, I guess.
Thanks, Andy. That said, all those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed, like sign. The motion passes unanimously. This matter is continued to the next council meeting with the public comment remaining open. Thank you. Next up on our agenda is communications from our Public Works Director.
All right. Good evening again, Mayor and Council, Deputy Mayor. I'm going to give you the let's get out of here before the siren goes off version of this. I think we've been through this on just about every project that we do. The city did recently learn of plans from MDT to resurface and make some crosswalk improvements on Spokane Avenue. This would be from East 2nd Street, I believe, down to East 13th Street, but they're still working on their final plans. What we do know is that there's an old cast iron water main under that road that we need to replace before the city or before the state does the work. So the project is estimated to cost about $1.95 million. We do budget on an annual basis for cast iron water main replacement. The fiscal year 22 budget is $1 million. Although we went for an American Rescue Plan Act grant for considerably more than that. We didn't get all of it, but we do have enough to get this work done. So we were awarded what's called our minimum allocation grant through ARPA of $1.45 million. So all in, we have about $2.5 million, which is enough to get this work done. So in accordance with the council's consultant selection policy, we need to create both a rating panel and a selection committee. The rating panel I'm recommending would consist of myself, Neil Desort, and Karin Hilding. We would then rate the consultants that send us proposals and take it to a selection committee. The selection committee does need to include one city council member, so my recommendation is that the selection committee consists of myself, Neil, Karin, and one city council member. So what I'm looking for from council tonight is approval of the rating panel as well as the selection panel, including one of you, or perhaps one of you that isn't here.
Thanks, Craig. Do I have any volunteers? Hey. Okay.
I mean, I have never done it. Is it hard? Do you just show up?
And listen and read.
Yeah, so depending on how many proposals we get, it'll be up to 3 consultants, so it'll be 3 interviews. We typically do them about 45 minutes each with 15 minutes or so in between. So it's about half a day.
Something you want our mayor to participate in?
It doesn't necessarily have to be the mayor.
Okay.
Council member or mayor suffice.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do it if you, unless I have a conflict of interest, because I do have a commercial property on that section of Spokane, so that's okay.
I don't think that presents any kind of a conflict.
Okay.
The only time you would have a conflict, Rebecca, is if you had a personal relationship or some financial interest in any one of the consultants that was applying to do this work. Okay? Great. Rebecca is willing to do this. Do I have a motion to appoint Rebecca and the rest of the selection committee? That's right.
I would make a motion to that effect.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Great. Any
Thank
other
you.
comments? All those in favor? All those opposed? Like sign. Craig, you have what you need? Good.
I'm all set, thanks.
Great, thanks. Next, Dana, communications. Anything, any updates?
I do have a brief update, just so that you're aware, at your next city council meeting, I am bringing forward an interlocal agreement with the county commissioners to add the city to the health board, the city county health board. So far, Columbia Falls City Council has considered the resolution. Kalispell will also consider the resolution on Monday, October 4th. And after that, after the cities have all considered it, the county commissioners will consider action on that agreement. So just wanted to give you an update on that as we see COVID obviously increasing. Unfortunately, the health boards don't have the ability to put into place healthcare or health measures to reduce the spread at this time, but the health board is very important when it comes to septic systems, other items that the city might benefit from as well. So it is an important spot that we should hold, considering our residents are paying 6 mills or whatever the millage is, excuse me, for the city county health board. So with that, that's all I actually have this evening.
Great. Any questions for Dana on her or anything else? Not seeing any. Next, we have communications from mayor and city councilors. We have a couple of letters in our packet this evening. Anyone wish to discuss either of those letters? Rebecca.
Yeah, I do concur with Jan Metzmaker that when we bring in dirty fill with resort tax dollars, it creates an issue. So I'm just wondering if we can address that in the neighborhoods. Like, it's common in my neighborhood. Every year the noxious weeds get worse, and it happened after resort tax money was used to reconstruct the road. And so she's saying that it's all around town. Who would be doing that then?
That would be a public works issue, at least the initial germination and restoration of the boulevards. We have added quite a bit of language to our standard specifications talking about weed germination within boulevards. It is something we look at during our 2-year warranty walk, and I would say that the more recent projects have been more successful, but the biggest issue that we have is we seed the boulevards, and then it's up to the property owners to water the boulevards to get the turf to come up. And if the turf doesn't come up, then whether there's weed seeds in the dirt or not, they're going to blow in there. So it's kind of a joint effort. We go through an educational campaign during the open houses and during the project with newsletters, but we just don't see a whole lot of people out there watering. But I will say, if you look at State Park Road, which is the most recent project that we've completed, both phases were really successful in getting turf to grow in the boulevard, and so I think we're moving in the right direction. She's also made comments about spraying for weeds, and I know we've had lots of conversations with the county about the money that we spend on the county weed committee or commission. I think that just becomes a budget issue down the road if we want to add more money to maintain weeds and boulevards. But I can tell you we're doing a much better job with resort tax projects.
What about fixing the ones that aren't doing well, though? I agree, State Park Road looks wonderful, but what about the ones that now, because every year we have noxious weeds in those boulevards, it gets worse, because they extract from the soil and don't let other things grow, so.
Yeah, well, that's, my point was, if that's something council wants to do, we need to add more money to the budget to have spraying, or work harder to get the county to come do the spraying for us.
And I think it's really important that we remember who maintains that boulevard. Well, while we have the street trees that we are maintaining, the maintenance is on the adjacent property owners for both sidewalk maintenance and the boulevard. You know, I think if there's obviously a clear issue in those first 2 years of warranty and it can be determined that it's, you know, due to the seeding, then the city would absolutely remediate that. But I can tell you that everywhere I look, knapweed is spreading, and it spreads fast. It really does in Montana. So code enforcement is obviously where we rely on making sure our property owners follow our rules and there are no noxious weeds as well. And you know, obviously it's been a busy summer with building. It's still booming, and we haven't increased the number of building inspectors. So when we have an individual who's assigned both building inspection and code enforcement, there's only so much time that we can spend on code enforcement. Obviously, we're focusing on short-term rentals as well in the same time period. So is there opportunity for additional staffing to help with enforcement of our weed ordinances? Probably, but at this point, our staff is definitely maxed.
We should turn it over to Heidi to write an article about weeds, and then everybody will know what to do, maybe. Okay, thank you.
Do you have any comments on this letter, Ben? I'd like to. Okay. I've got a couple things. I'd like to, Craig and Maria, it goes into your area a little bit. It seems to me that what we're doing now is clearly not working. The noxious weeds are spreading. They're all over the place. I guess Jan, at least at one point, referenced the fact that I guess there are some cities and communities that they send them a letter, they don't fix it, it doesn't get sprayed, the city goes out and sprays it and bills them. Is that something we need to put in place? Is that something we need to do to fix this problem? It just seems to me something we got to consider. You know, we have a weed committee for a reason. It's so it can take a little bit of relief off of our staff in terms of wandering around trying to figure out what's happening where. I mean, that's why we have that weed committee. It seems to me we need to, for lack of a better decision, arm them or give them or give ourselves the authority to go in and enforce if we can't get compliance. And so that's just a thought. I mean, is that something we ought to be considering?
We already do that with code enforcement, Frank. So it's very similar to our snow removal. If somebody does not remove snow from the sidewalk, we send a letter, and then they have a certain number of days to remediate the situation.
Right.
So that is already in place in our regulations. Again, staff time is obviously a challenge when it comes to our code enforcement side. And weeds, our code right now only requires that, you know, noxious weeds be dealt with. Oftentimes you'll hear complaints about dandelions and those type of things. Those can just be mowed. I mean, they really don't. And they don't qualify as a noxious weed.
Dandelions.
So, yeah. Even though they're everywhere. But the bees really like them, so.
Yeah.
There's that.
Horses like them, I can tell you that for sure. Okay, well, it just seems to me, particularly with the noxious weeds, we need to be figuring out what we need to do to change the losing game, in my view. And thanks. The other letter that we received this evening, John asked that we discuss, and that is a complaint from Mr. Gillum and Mr. Berg regarding how we assess and collect our impact fees. Dana, do you have any comments on that letter?
I do. The city, so city staff has been communicating with Mr. Gilman and Mr. Berg. They were actually here earlier. I'm surprised they didn't get up and speak, to be honest, but their letter was in the packet. So the city staff has been providing them a lot of documentation. And where this all started, I'm not quite sure. I'm not sure if Mr. Gilman was looking at doing an addition on his home, and this brought to light our impact fees. But I did receive, his report and what you have in the packet. I've already done an internal, review, I guess is what I would say, investigation into the accusations or alleged issues. We did find an error in our program calculator, which is an Excel spreadsheet, in which we account for the number of fixtures per building. We're aware of that issue. It hasn't been in effect this whole time, so it's a very limited window that we're gonna have to look at, which is about 2 years. And we'll go back and we will look at how that impacts the buildings that had applied during that period, and if any refunds were required. That is state law. We're not trying to avoid state law by any means. The other allegations that Mr. Gilman is making is that our impact fees are developed and being implemented incorrectly. I had a call with FCS Group, who performed our 2018 impact fee update, and confirmed that there was no change in methodology from our HDR initial study that created our impact fees in 2007. In fact, all that we've done is we updated the capital improvements that were planned based on the CIP that was available at the time, and then and any planned projects that council was discussing. And so those changes, though, would not have created an issue in the way that we've collected or assessed our impact fees. It is correct that we no longer generally will issue a 5/8 inch meter, which is pretty standard. You're seeing that quite a bit now just because they wear out quicker. Homes are tending to be built with larger number of fixture units, more outdoor services, more bathrooms, etc. And keep in mind, your smaller apartments, they're going to be, like for workforce housing, is on one master meter, so it's not quite the same. There are numbers thrown out in the report that I cannot confirm if they're accurate or not. Again, we haven't done our audit to see what type of refunds are due to any developers. We are working on that. It's the same staff that is working on Republic Services contract with garbage and recycling and new billing and a website updates. So we, again, are still very, very impacted by staff time. I know that Mr. Gilman and Mr. Berg both would like an independent audit of our impact fees. I am not opposed to that, but I also question the use of taxpayer dollars to audit something that has gone through a significant public process. We had paid FCS Group to prepare that report. I personally have actually worked with FCS Group as the finance director at the time. But again, if the council wants to do an audit, if the state comes and audits us, I'm open book. There is nothing that I'm trying to hide. If we've done something wrong, like I said, with the fixture units, I'm absolutely okay with saying, you know what, we have an error. Here's what we're going to do to fix it. And so, like I said, we've provided a lot of information. We have since asked that they, complete a records request form because the staff time that's been taken to respond with documents has exceeded the standard. 15 minutes is when we start to look at records request forms, and that's standard across all individuals who request documents from the city. So many of what has been requested could have been found online anyways. But so with that, if the council is interested in an audit, I leave that up to you. I do believe that we are assessing impact fees correctly based on the conversation I had with FCS Group. I am waiting on Todd's email to me that will explain more about his report, and I do plan to forward that on to Mr. Gilman as well. And again, when we had met with them at the end of August, Ben Dahlman and I met with them, and we agreed that, we're going to do that audit, but it's going to take a few months. There's no way that we're going to have the staff capacity to do it right away. And they seemed at least amenable at the time to that. So I will say that he has submitted his letters to the state of Montana. If they might be looking at investigating us again, like I said, open book here. It saves me the work of having to try to respond to all of these comments. But then also, I know that NBC Montana reached out to me today. They plan to interview Mr. Gilman on Wednesday. So I did say, you know, please, I would like to be able to at least provide what information I know right now, so that there is not miscommunication with the public because of some of the numbers in that report. I cannot confirm whether they're accurate or not. That's the update.
Any other questions for Dana on that matter from council?
The public might not know Dana's background, but she was our finance director for 5 years, 4 years, 5. And before that, she audited cities around the state for a number of years as well. So she knows city government and the funding for city government inside and out. And so she's really bright, and I really trust her in all financial things too. So I just wanted to reassure the public, when we have people accuse us of something, we do research it, of course, but she does know what she's talking about too.
I guess my only comment would be that I'm comfortable with not having an outside audit, and I think, Dana, you caught the imperfections in our spreadsheets, and I'm perfectly fine with that. Quite frankly, the way this letter is written, I could find a lot of flaws in it too. So I'll just specifically, it's like total water sewer impacts have tripled. Well, yeah, we probably wrote a lot more building permits in 2021 than we did in 2018. So it's a figures don't lie and liars don't figure kind of statement, which I really don't care for. And so I'm comfortable, and I think that's why we hired FCS to begin with, was to do an audit of those impact fees to see if we were charging enough so we're being fair to the existing residents in this community, which is the whole important part of impact fees. And we all know that impact fee books are about this thick, and this much of it tells you why you should do it, and then the last amount of it is all telling you how to defend yourself in court and make sure that there is an actual nexus and link between what you're charging and what you're not. That's what FCS does for a living. That's their specialty. That's why we hired them. So I'm very comfortable that we've done that. And I think that we just proceed as we are right now, and I think if there's refunds due, then I know we'll get those refunds back to people. If we did make mistakes, we're an honest group of folks, and that will happen. So.
May I say I concur. Any other comments on the letters? Okay, with that, we'll start with Rebecca. Any further comments this evening?
The only thing is, I'm sorry I get so upset about water issues, but I really do get upset about them. So, Craig, would you mind following up about that wetlands thing?
Yep, I'd be happy to.
All right, thank you. And the only other thing is I am planning a candidates forum for Tuesday, October 26th at the O'Shaughnessy, tentatively. And I decided on that space because it's bigger and people might be able to spread out more with COVID. We have quite a few candidates running for city council, and I think we'll see how it goes with the pandemic. There's a chance we could do it here, remote, with maybe a remote version. But when I ran, I really felt like it helped a lot to have an opportunity for the public to ask questions. And also a lot of the candidates don't seem to be well known to other people. And so I'm just doing this because I really believe it's important. So it's not a city council effort, it's Rebecca Norton's doing this. Okay, just a heads up.
Thanks, Rebecca. Ben.
I did want to make a brief comment. I know I've heard that there is this highway meeting this Wednesday that has to do with MDT's plan for the highway coming through town. And I'll be the first person to say I look forward to learning a little bit more about this issue, but I'm maybe as an open question, is this completely under the control of MDT? And if so, do we intend as a group to comment on it or something? Or how do we participate in this process?
I'll just give you a brief update. So this is actually part of the Downtown Highway Study Committee of MDT. So on that committee, myself, Craig, and Mayor Mulfeld are on that committee, and Andy, you might be, is Andy? Did we decide? I think maybe you're an alternate, Andy, or something like that. You're an alternate. I don't think you've ever had to come. Anyway, so those are your city staff representatives. We also have, there are, I know Rhonda and, help me out. Ron, thank you. Ron Brunk are also on that committee, as well as MDT staff. So we've been meeting
Kevin
for.
Garland.
Oh, and Kevin Garland. Yeah, thank you. With the chamber. Anybody else I'm missing? Dave? Okay.
I don't know.
I'm obviously missing a lot of people. There are, and so we do have a committee that's been meeting, though, over the course of probably, I don't even know when we started, over a year, because COVID kind of put an impact on it. But there were multiple alternatives that were looked at. As you heard from Toby, there was alternative G and alternative C that ended up as like basically the last two alternatives going through rating criteria. I'm not sure again what they're going to present on a Wednesday, but it's very important to provide your comments to them that evening. I don't, I'm not clear, but my understanding is that without community support, they might not be able to proceed. So there needs to be community support. Now, how they gauge the community support of a project, I'm not quite sure. Whether is it that you just had to have participation, or does it actually have to be a vocalized support? So that is kind of an area of interest, and I think people should attend, because it is going to be a very important meeting for this community, as it involves Baker Avenue as well as Spokane. There's consideration of putting 3 lanes on Baker Avenue. We often talk about Spokane, but Baker Avenue is also the other side that hasn't been discussed. And 2nd Street, they have in both alternatives that made it to the end include that as just maintaining basically status quo of 2 lanes. With some extensions on turn lanes to help with traffic flow. So I encourage everybody to attend and provide their comments. There's split decisions on that committee, obviously, because it's made up of MDT staff and city staff and community members. So I don't think that there was ever a consensus made on which alternative to go to, is my understanding. Craig, did we ever vote on it? I don't even think we voted on it or anything. So there was no community action on which alternative to recommend.
Thank you. Yeah, that was going to be my question as well. Do you support it or not?
Once you see it, you get to decide if you support it as an individual. I think again, we're appointed as committee members on an MDT committee, and they haven't asked for that vote yet. So there's pros and cons, I think, to both alternatives.
Is that decision coming soon, or is that something that's way down the road?
I think MDT wants to move forward quickly because it's been such a long process. And then once they get through this initial phase, there is an extensive planning process and design process, because this is very conceptual at this point. It doesn't include actually the engineering or design or anything like that. So I believe that they've said it, even after deciding on an alternative, Craig, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like 5 years out even still.
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Is your
I don't think there's going to be a vote on behalf of the steering committee. I think we're probably going to have one more meeting after this public open house, but it seems pretty clear to me that MDT's made up their mind that they want to move forward with this option C. So
I would agree.
I think once the study is out, we should bring it to council for a resolution to support or not support, but I think that's really all we're going to get to do is put together a resolution.
Makes a lot of sense to me. Thank you. That's all I got.
Fine. Nothing this evening? Andy, nothing this evening? I would just also encourage the public to come to that public hearing on Wednesday, or the public meeting on Wednesday. What I've heard so far about the proposed plan, it would be wholly inconsistent with, shall we say, the vision this city has for itself and for Highway 93 as it travels along 2nd Street. So I hope the community will attend and will voice their opposition and strong support for, if there is another alternative they find good, that's great. But I think MDT needs to hear that there is no community support if that's the case. So I encourage everybody to go. With that, I would close this meeting, and good night all.